An elderly farmer protected an abandoned child during a storm, but 2 days later, a Supreme Court justice showed up with documents revealing an incredible truth. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. The ancient oak trees surrounding Harold Whitaker's farmhouse groaned under the assault of the gathering storm. 78 years of life had taught the old farmer to read the skies, and what he saw now sent a chill through his weathered bones. This wasn't just another summer squall. The unnatural greenish tint to the southwestern clouds, the eerie stillness that had settled over his 50 acres, nature was preparing to unleash something terrible. Harold stood on his worn porch, gnarled hands gripping the railing as he surveyed his property. The corn was nearly ready for harvest, rows of green and gold swaying slightly in the occasional gust that preceded the main force of the storm. 53 years he'd worked this land, through drought and flood, through personal tragedy and rare triumph. The farm was all he had left now, a legacy built on calloused hands and stubborn determination. "Come on, Rusty," he called to his aging retriever. "Let's get the animals secured." The old dog lifted his head from his favorite spot, eyes clouded with cataracts, but still loyal, as the day Harold had found him abandoned on this very road 15 years ago. Together they made their way to the barn, Harold's arthritic hip protesting with each step. His doctor in town had been after him for years to consider moving into the retirement community, or at least to let his nephew Michael help more with the farm. But Harold was not a man who yielded easily. Not to weather, not to age, and certainly not to well-meaning suggestions that smelled of charity. The first heavy drops began to fall as Harold latched the barn door, the animals inside now protected from what was coming. The wind was picking up dramatically, bending the smaller trees nearly horizontal. He needed to get back to the house, secure the storm shutters, and wait it out. But something caught his eye, a movement on the road that ran past his property, something out of place in the developing fury of the storm. Harold squinted through the increasing rain. There, by his mailbox, a small figure hunched against the wind. A child? Out in this weather? "What in tarnation?" he muttered, changing direction immediately. The wind nearly knocked him off his feet as he made his way toward the road, Rusty struggling to keep pace beside him. As he drew closer, Harold could make out more details. A small girl, couldn't be more than 6 or 7 years old, drenched through her thin jacket, clutching something to her chest. She was shivering violently, her dark hair plastered to her pale face. "Child!" Harold called out, his voice nearly lost in the howling wind. "Child, what are you doing out here?" The girl's head snapped up, eyes wide with fear. For a moment, Harold thought she might run, but another powerful gust nearly knocked her over, deciding the matter. Harold reached her just as her small legs gave way. "I've got you," he said, steadying her with surprising strength for a man his age. "Come on now. We need to get inside." The girl looked up at him, rain mixing with tears on her face. Are you Mr. Whitaker?" she asked, her voice small and uncertain. Harold's bushy eyebrows shot up in surprise. "I am. How do you know my name, child?" But another crash of thunder drowned out any response she might have given. The storm was intensifying rapidly. "Never mind that now," Harold said, guiding her toward the farmhouse. "Let's get you warm and dry. Then we can sort this out." The journey back to the house was treacherous. Twice the wind nearly toppled them. But Harold's hand remained firm on the girl's shoulder. By the time they reached the porch, hail had begun to fall, pebble-sized chunks of ice bouncing off the wooden steps. Harold ushered the child inside, Rusty following with a shake that sprayed water across the entryway. "Stay here," Harold instructed, helping the girl onto a kitchen chair. She was shivering uncontrollably now, her lips taking on a bluish tint that worried the old farmer. "I need to close up the storm shutters. Then we'll get you into some dry clothes." The girl nodded, still clutching whatever it was to her chest. A backpack, Harold now realized, worn and soaked through. Rusty approached her cautiously, sniffing with interest. To Harold's surprise, the girl reached out a trembling hand to pat the dog's head. "His name's Rusty," Harold said. "He's friendly as they come." A ghost of a smile crossed the child's face, the first sign of anything but fear he'd seen from her. Harold hurried to secure the house against the storm, moving with the efficiency of someone who had weathered countless such events. When he returned to the kitchen 10 minutes later, he found the girl hadn't moved, except to let Rusty rest his head on her lap. "Now then," Harold said, retrieving a clean towel from a drawer. "Let's dry you off. My wife, God rest her soul, kept some clothes in the spare bedroom. Things for the grandchildren when they visited. Might be something that'll fit you." The girl accepted the towel but made no move to dry herself. "My name is Sophia," she said quietly, her voice barely audible over the rain hammering against the windows. "Sophia Reeves." "Well, Sophia Reeves," Harold replied, filling the kettle and placing it on the stove. "How about you tell me what you're doing out in the worst storm of the season, and how you know my name?" Sophia looked down at her sodden backpack, then back at Harold, her eyes filled with a wariness no child should possess. "My mom told me to find you if anything happened to her." Harold froze, his hand still on the kettle. "Your mother? Who is your mother, child?" "Eleanor Reeves," Sophia said, watching Harold's face carefully. "But she used to be Eleanor Whitaker." The kettle slipped from Harold's grasp, clattering loudly on the stove. Eleanor, a name he hadn't spoken aloud in nearly 30 years. His only daughter. "Eleanor," he whispered, looking at the child with new eyes, the same dark hair, the same determined set to the jaw. "Eleanor sent you to me?" Sophia nodded slowly, unzipping her backpack with fingers still stiff from cold. She pulled out a sealed envelope, protected from the rain by a plastic bag. "She gave me this. Said if the men came, I should run to you." Harold took the envelope with trembling hands, his mind racing. Eleanor had left the farm at 18, headstrong and furious after their last explosive argument. He'd been too proud to reach out, and she too hurt to return. Decades of silence stretched between them, a void he'd convinced himself could never be bridged. "What men, Sophia?" Harold asked, his voice gentler now. "And where is your mother?" The girl's face crumpled, tears welling in her eyes. "They came to our apartment last night. Mom hid me in the closet, told me not to make a sound no matter what I heard. There was shouting and—" Her voice broke. "I think they hurt her. When they left, Mom couldn't get up." Harold felt a cold weight settle in his chest, colder than the storm outside. "Did she—" He couldn't finish the question. "The neighbor lady came when she heard noise. She called an ambulance. Mom told me to take that envelope and run, to find Grandpa Harold's farm outside of Millfield." Sophia wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "She said you'd keep me safe." The storm outside seemed to reach a new level of fury, wind shrieking around the corners of the old farmhouse. But Harold barely noticed. His estranged daughter was hurt, possibly dying, and had sent her child, his granddaughter, to him for protection. He moved to open the envelope, but Sophia's small hand stopped him. "Mom said only open it if they find us here." "Who, child? Who are these men?" Sophia shook her head, her eyes wide with fear. "I don't know. Men in suits. Mom called one of them Senator. She said what's in that envelope could put them all in prison." Harold studied his granddaughter's face, seeing the exhaustion and fear etched there. Questions burned in his mind, but they could wait. The child needed warmth, food, and rest. "Let's get you into dry clothes first," he said, tucking the envelope into his shirt pocket. "Then some hot soup. The storm's going to last through the night, so we're not going anywhere till morning." As he helped Sophia into the spare bedroom to change, Harold's mind raced with implications. Eleanor had been a lawyer, he remembered. Last he'd heard through the Millfield grapevine, She'd taken a position with the state attorney general's office. What had she gotten involved in? What kind of danger had followed her daughter to his doorstep? The wind howled outside, rattling the shutters. Harold had always faced storms head-on, weathering whatever nature threw at his farm. But as he heated soup on the stove, the old farmer realized this storm might not be one he could face alone. For the first time in years, he considered reaching out for help. The phone lines were down. They always went early in big storms. But when the weather cleared, he'd need to make some calls. His nephew Michael, for one. Maybe Sheriff Dawson, though Harold had his suspicions about the man's integrity. Trust had never come easily to Harold Whitaker, and now it seemed his caution might be justified. His granddaughter was asleep before she finished her soup, the emotional and physical toll of her journey overwhelming her small body. Harold carried her to the spare bed, tucking the quilt his late wife had made around her shoulders. Rusty took up position beside the bed, his protective instincts apparently extending to this new arrival. Sitting in his rocking chair by the window, Harold watched the storm rage. The envelope felt heavy in his pocket, laden with secrets he wasn't yet privy to. But one thing was clear. His estranged daughter had trusted him with her most precious possession, her child. After 30 years of silence, when Eleanor needed someone to protect what she loved most, she had turned to her father. Harold Whitaker straightened his bent shoulders. Whatever was coming for his granddaughter would have to go through him first. And while he might be old, he was far from helpless. Morning would bring clearer skies and decisions to be made. But for tonight, he would guard the child as the storm raged on. What he couldn't know was that in just 2 days, a black government SUV would roll up his driveway, carrying a Supreme Court justice with documents that would shake the foundations of power in the nation's capital and put everyone at the farm directly in the crosshairs of some of the most dangerous men in America. Harold woke with the first light of dawn, his body stiff from spending the night in the rocking chair. The storm had finally passed, leaving behind a landscape transformed. Fallen branches littered the yard, and one of the old hickory trees near the property line had toppled completely, its massive roots now exposed to the air like grasping fingers. The house had weathered the storm intact, testament to the solid construction his grandfather had insisted upon nearly a century ago. Harold checked on Sophia, finding her still deeply asleep, Rusty maintaining his vigilant position beside the bed. The old dog raised his head at Harold's entrance, thumping his tail once in greeting before returning to his self-appointed duty. In the harsh light of morning, the events of the previous night seemed almost dreamlike. After 30 years of silence, his estranged daughter had thrust her child, his grandchild, into his life, along with what sounded like serious trouble. Harold removed the envelope from his pocket, turning it over in his weathered hands. Whatever secrets it contained, Eleanor had deemed them dangerous enough to warrant sending her daughter into a storm, rather than keeping her close. What kind of danger could justify such a decision? The telephone remained dead, as Harold had expected. After making a pot of strong coffee, he powered up the old ham radio he kept for emergencies. Static crackled through the speakers as he adjusted the frequency. CQ, this is W9GFO. Anyone reading me? Over. After several attempts, a familiar voice broke through. W9GFO, this is KD9XYZ. That you, Harold? We were getting worried when you didn't check in during the storm. Over. Morning, Michael, Harold replied, recognizing his nephew's call sign. Farm's still standing, but we've got some cleanup ahead. Listen, something's happened. Need you to come out as soon as the roads are passable. And Michael, come alone, it's important. Over. A pause. Everything all right, Uncle Harold? Over. Harold glanced toward the bedroom where Sophia slept. Not sure yet. Just get here when you can. Oh, and bring some groceries if possible. Got an extra mouth to feed. Over and out. He switched off the radio before Michael could ask further questions. His nephew was a good man, level-headed and discreet. As the county's most respected doctor, Michael had resources and connections that might prove useful. But more importantly, Harold trusted him implicitly, something he couldn't say about many others. The floorboards creaked behind him. Harold turned to find Sophia standing in the doorway, her small frame nearly swallowed by one of his late wife's flannel shirts that she'd apparently found and pulled over her own clothes. Her dark hair was a wild tangle, her eyes still heavy with sleep, but watchful, assessing. "Good morning," Harold said, suddenly uncertain how to address this child who was both stranger and blood. "Did you sleep all right?" Sophia nodded, her gaze moving to the coffee pot. "Do you have any juice?" "Afraid not," Harold admitted. "Storm knocked out the power, so the refrigerator's not working. Got some canned peaches, though. The syrup's sweet." The mention of peaches earned him the first genuine smile he'd seen from the girl. As she ate, sitting cross-legged at the kitchen table, Harold fought the urge to barrage her with questions. She was just a child, after all, and had been through enough trauma. "Your mom," he finally said, keeping his voice gentle. "Is she a lawyer like she always wanted to be?" Sophia nodded, swallowing a piece of peach. "She works for the state, investigates bad people." A shadow crossed her face. "That's why the men came." Harold leaned forward, careful not to appear too eager. "What can you tell me about these men, Sophia?" The child's fingers tightened around her fork. "Mom never told me much. She said it was safer if I didn't know details, but she was scared of them, especially the one she called Senator. She said he could hurt people without touching them." A chill ran through Harold that had nothing to do with the lingering dampness from the storm. A powerful politician involved in something illegal, dangerous enough that Eleanor had feared for her life and her daughter's safety. "The envelope," Harold said. "Did your mother tell you what's inside?" "Evidence," Sophia replied, the adult words sounding strange from her young lips. "She said it's like a map that shows all the connections." The girl's eyes filled suddenly with tears. "Do you think Mom is dead?" The question, delivered with such blunt, childish directness, caught Harold off guard. He reached across the table, covering her small hand with his gnarled one. "I don't know, child, but your mother is the strongest, most stubborn person I've ever known, besides myself, that is." He attempted a reassuring smile. "Whitakers don't give up easily." A noise outside drew their attention, the distinctive sound of tires on gravel. Harold rose quickly, moving to the window with surprising agility for a man his age. A mud-splattered truck was making its way up the long drive. "It's all right," he said, recognizing the vehicle. "It's my nephew, Michael. He's a doctor in town. A good man." But Sophia had already disappeared, the chair where she'd been sitting now empty. Harold found her in the bedroom closet, knees pulled to her chest, eyes wide with fear. "It's okay," he said, crouching down despite the protest from his arthritic joints. "Michael is family. He can help us." "Mom said not to trust anyone," Sophia whispered. "She said they have people everywhere." Harold nodded slowly, understanding the gravity of the situation anew through the child's fear. "All right, you stay here if you want. I'll talk to him first, make sure everything's safe." Michael Peterson had his uncle's height but none of his leanness, his broad shoulders filling the doorframe as Harold let him in. At 45, Michael's dark hair was already showing streaks of gray at the temples, a feature he attributed to the stress of rural medicine rather than genetics. "Uncle Harold," Michael said, embracing the older man briefly. "I came as soon as the main roads were cleared." His practiced medical gaze surveyed his uncle. "You look exhausted. What's going on? Your message sounded urgent." Harold hesitated, decades of self-reliance making it difficult to share his burden, even with Michael. "It's complicated," he finally said, "and not entirely my secret to tell." He explained about the storm, finding Sophia on the road, and the bare essentials of what the child had shared. Michael listened without interruption, his expression growing increasingly troubled. "Eleanor's daughter," he said when Harold finished. "That would make her, what, 7 years old?" "6, I think," Harold replied. "Haven't exactly kept up with birthdays." Michael's face softened with understanding. He had been 12 when Eleanor left, old enough to remember the shouting matches between his stubborn uncle and equally headstrong cousin. "Does the child know anything more about who's after them or what's in the envelope?" Harold shook his head. "Just that it involves someone powerful, a senator, and that whatever evidence Eleanor gathered could put people in prison." "You should open it," Michael said, nodding toward the envelope still in Harold's shirt pocket. "If it's as dangerous as it sounds, you need to know what you're dealing with." Eleanor told the girl to keep it sealed, unless they found us here. Michael ran a hand through his hair, a gesture Harold recognized from the boy's childhood. "Uncle Harold, with all due respect, if these people are as connected and dangerous as they sound, it's only a matter of time before they track the girl here. You need to be prepared." Before Harold could respond, the sound of small footsteps announced Sophia's arrival. She stood in the hallway, still swimming in the oversized flannel shirt, studying Michael with wary eyes. "You're a doctor?" she asked. Michael nodded, crouching to her level. "That's right. Dr. Michael Peterson. Your grandfather is my uncle. Can you help my mom?" Direct like all children, cutting straight to her most urgent concern. Michael glanced at Harold before answering carefully. "I don't know where your mom is right now, Sophia, but I promise I'll do everything I can to help both of you." Something in his sincere tone seemed to satisfy the child. She approached the kitchen table, standing between the two men. "You should open it," she said, pointing to the envelope in Harold's pocket. "Mom would want you to if it meant keeping us safe." Harold studied his granddaughter's face, seeing Eleanor's determination there. With a nod, he removed the envelope and broke the seal. Inside were several photographs, handwritten notes, and a USB drive. The photographs showed men in expensive suits at what appeared to be private meetings. Harold recognized one face immediately from news broadcasts: Senator James Whitridge, the rising political star who'd been touted as a future presidential candidate. But it was one of the handwritten pages that made Harold's blood run cold. A list of names, dates, and amounts, with his own name circled in red at the bottom. "What in God's name?" he whispered, looking up at Michael in confusion. "Why is my name on this list?" "Uncle Harold," Michael said, his voice tight with urgency as he studied the documents over Harold's shoulder. "I think I know what this is about, and if I'm right, we need to call Judge Martinez immediately." "The Supreme Court Justice?" Harold asked, bewildered. "Why would she—" "Because," Michael interrupted, "she's been quietly building a case against Whitridge and his network for years, and it looks like Eleanor may have found the missing piece." Harold stared at his nephew, struggling to process the implications. "Justice Martinez? The same Elena Martinez who's been all over the news for her anti-corruption rulings?" Michael nodded grimly, still examining the documents. "The very same. And if Eleanor was working with her office—" He left the sentence unfinished, the consequences hanging in the air between them. "But why is my name on this list?" Harold demanded, pointing at the paper with a trembling finger. "I've never had dealings with any senator." Michael frowned, studying the document more closely. "These appear to be property acquisitions. Dates, parcel numbers, amounts paid." His finger traced down the list. "Your name is the last one, but it's different from the others. No transaction amount. Just your name and Whitaker Farm, with yesterday's date circled." A chill ran through Harold as understanding dawned. They knew she'd send Sophia here. He turned to his granddaughter, who was watching their exchange with silent intensity. "How did you get here, child? Did someone drive you?" "Mrs. Giordano from next door," Sophia replied. After the ambulance took Mom, she drove me to the bus station. I took the bus to Millfield, then walked. In the storm? Michael asked, disbelief coloring his voice. Sophia nodded, her small shoulders squared with a dignity beyond her years. I had to get here before them. Mom said it was the most important thing. Harold exchanged a look with Michael. The child had traveled alone across the state, navigating public transportation and walking miles in a dangerous storm, all because Eleanor had impressed upon her the vital importance of reaching the farm before her pursuers. I need to make a call, Michael said, pulling out his cell phone. No service, he muttered after checking the screen. The storm must have damaged the cell towers, too. Landline's still dead, Harold confirmed, and we can't use the ham radio for this. Too many people listening in. Michael paced the small kitchen, thinking, I need to get back to town. I can use the secure line at the hospital to contact Judge Martinez. She needs to know about this immediately. And leave us here unprotected? Harold gestured toward Sophia. Look at this list. They're coming for the farm, today. Which is precisely why I need to get help, Michael insisted. Uncle Harold, these aren't ordinary criminals. If Senator Whitridge is involved... I know what's at stake, Harold interrupted, his voice hardening. I may be old, but I'm not helpless. I've got my shotgun, and I know how to use it. Against professional killers? Michael ran a hand through his hair in frustration. This isn't the time for your stubborn self-reliance. We need law enforcement, federal marshals, not local police. Harold was about to argue further when Sophia's small voice cut through the tension. The men who came for Mom had badges, she said quietly. They showed them to get into our building. Mom said they were fake, but they looked real. The two men fell silent, absorbing this new information. If Whitridge's people had access to convincing law enforcement credentials, they couldn't trust any authorities who might show up at the farm without proper verification. I still need to contact Judge Martinez, Michael said finally. But you're right, I shouldn't leave you alone. He thought for a moment. What about the Peterson hunting cabin? It's isolated, well-stocked, and only family knows about it. Harold considered this. The cabin, nestled deep in the woods that bordered his property to the north, had been in Michael's mother's family for generations. It was accessible only by a narrow, unmarked dirt track that was easily missed if you didn't know exactly where to look. It might work as a temporary hideout, Harold agreed reluctantly. But I'm not abandoning my farm. Nobody's asking you to abandon it permanently, Michael said, his patience clearly strained. But right now, Sophia's safety has to be the priority. At the mention of her name, both men turned to the child, who had moved to the window and was now peering out with alarming intensity. Sophia, Harold called, concerned by her sudden stillness. What is it? There's a car, she whispered, not turning from the window. Coming up the road. Harold joined her, his heart sinking as he spotted the vehicle. A black SUV with tinted windows, moving slowly along the county road that passed his property. It wasn't yet turning into his driveway, but it had slowed considerably as it approached the farm. Government plates, Michael observed, squinting at the distant vehicle. Could be legitimate federal agents. Or not, Harold countered. We can't take that chance. He turned to Sophia, placing his hands on her small shoulders. Remember the envelope, child. Did your mother tell you anything else? Anything about who we can trust? Sophia's brow furrowed in concentration. She said if Judge Martinez came herself, we could trust her. But nobody else. Not even people who said they worked for her. Harold nodded, decision made. Michael, help me gather supplies. We're going to the cabin. They moved quickly, Harold retrieving his shotgun from the gun cabinet while Michael filled a backpack with bottled water, canned food, and first aid supplies. Sophia stood watch at the window, providing updates on the SUV, which had now passed the farm without turning in, but was moving at a crawl. as if the occupants were carefully surveying the property. "They're looking for signs someone's here," Harold muttered, joining Sophia briefly at the window. "Lucky for us, the storm knocked out the power to the whole area, so dark windows won't seem suspicious." Within 10 minutes, they were ready. Michael shouldered the supply backpack, while Harold carried his shotgun and a smaller bag containing the documents and a few personal items. Sophia had changed back into her own clothes, now dry, and wore a pair of Harold's late wife's rubber boots, comically large on her small feet, but necessary for the muddy trek ahead. "We'll take the north pasture," Harold instructed, leading them out the back door. "Stay close to the tree line where we can't be seen from the road." The morning air was heavy with moisture, the ground soft and treacherous from the night's deluge. They moved as quickly as possible, Michael occasionally lifting Sophia over particularly muddy patches. Rusty followed loyally, apparently understanding the need for quiet as he padded along without his usual barking enthusiasm. They had almost reached the tree line when the sound of an engine made Harold freeze. The black SUV had returned and was now turning into his driveway. "Run!" he hissed, urging them toward the shelter of the forest. "Get to the trees." They sprinted the remaining distance, Sophia struggling to keep up in the oversized boots until Michael simply scooped her into his arms. They reached the edge of the woods, just as the SUV pulled to a stop in front of Harold's farmhouse. From their concealed position, they watched as two figures emerged from the vehicle. "Can you see who it is?" Michael whispered. Harold narrowed his eyes, wishing he'd thought to bring his binoculars. Man and a woman, both in suits, the woman's older gray hair. "Martinez?" Michael wondered aloud. "Can't tell from here, but they're definitely looking for someone. See how they're checking for tracks?" Indeed, the woman was crouched near the front porch, examining the muddy ground where their footprints would be clearly visible, despite their attempts to obscure them. "They'll know we left recently," Harold said grimly, "and which direction we went." "Then we don't have much time," Michael replied, shifting Sophia in his arms. "The cabin's still our best bet. We can defend it if necessary, and it has the emergency radio." They plunged deeper into the forest, following a path known only to those who had hunted these woods for generations. The going was difficult, with fallen branches and new streams formed by the storm's runoff, blocking their usual route in several places. Harold led the way, his familiarity with the terrain compensating for his age-related limitations. Behind them, faintly, came the sound of voices calling out. The visitors from the SUV had found their trail and were following. "Grandpa," Sophia said, the word coming naturally to her lips for the first time. "I think I recognize the lady's voice." Harold slowed, turning to the child still carried in Michael's arms. "From where?" "She came to our apartment once," Sophia replied. "Mom made me stay in my room, but I peeked. They were looking at papers like the ones in the envelope." Harold and Michael exchanged loaded glances. If the woman was indeed Judge Martinez, they might be running from the very help they needed. But if Sophia was mistaken, or if the woman was an imposter, turning back could be a fatal error. "We keep going," Harold decided. "If it's truly Judge Martinez, she'll understand our caution and follow us to the cabin. If it's not, well, we'll be in a better position to defend ourselves there than out in the open." As they resumed their difficult journey through the storm-ravaged forest, Harold couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into a situation far more complex than a simple chase. The envelope in his pocket seemed to grow heavier with each step, its contents representing not just evidence of corruption, but a direct threat to his family's survival. And somewhere in the back of his mind, a question kept nagging. Why had Eleanor circled his name? What connection did the humble Whitaker farm have to a conspiracy that had apparently reached the highest levels of government? The answers, Harold suspected, lay with the two people following their trail through the forest. Whether they were allies or the harbingers of destruction remained to be seen. The Peterson hunting cabin appeared before them like a mirage. a small structure of weathered logs nestled in a clearing, surrounded by ancient pines. Under different circumstances, Harold might have appreciated its rustic charm and the memories it evoked. Weekend hunting trips with Michael's father, teaching Eleanor to fish in the nearby stream, simpler times when his world made sense. Almost there, Michael encouraged, his breath coming in short gasps as he continued carrying Sophia. The child had insisted she could walk after the first mile, but the difficult terrain and need for speed had made it more practical for Michael to bear her weight. Harold reached the cabin first, retrieving the key from its hiding place beneath a false rock near the back steps. His hands trembled slightly as he unlocked the door. Not from fear, he told himself, but from the exertion of their hasty trek through the woods. The cabin's interior was simple but well-maintained. A main room with a stone fireplace, small kitchen area, and 2 doors leading to bedrooms. Michael set Sophia down on a worn but clean sofa, while Harold secured the door behind them. "We should have about 15 minutes before they reach us, assuming they're following our trail and not circling back," Michael said, moving to check the cabin's supplies. He opened a cabinet near the fireplace, revealing an impressive array of emergency equipment, including a more sophisticated radio than the one at Harold's farm. "I'll try to make contact with someone we can trust," Michael said, powering up the radio. "You should get that shotgun ready just in case." Harold nodded grimly, checking the weapon's ammunition. He'd never fired it at a human being and prayed today wouldn't be the first time. But Sophia's safety superseded all other concerns, even his deep-seated aversion to violence. "What can I do?" Sophia asked, her small voice steady despite the ordeal. Harold regarded his granddaughter thoughtfully. The child had shown remarkable resilience, traveling alone across the state, enduring a storm, and now fleeing through difficult terrain without complaint. She deserved honesty, not patronizing assurances. "You can be our lookout," he decided, gesturing toward the window that offered the best view of their back trail. "Tell us the moment you see anyone approaching." Sophia nodded solemnly, taking up her position at the window, with the seriousness of a soldier assigned to sentry duty. Rusty settled beside her, his gray muzzle resting on his paws, alert despite his exhaustion. Michael worked the radio, attempting to establish a secure connection. "No good," he muttered, after several minutes of adjusting frequencies and speaking in coded language Harold didn't fully understand. "Storm must have damaged the repeater stations. We're cut off." Harold had expected as much. In his experience, when trouble came, it rarely arrived alone. "Then we prepare to meet our visitors," he said, moving to stand beside Sophia at the window. "One way or another, we'll know soon enough if they're friend or foe." "There," Sophia whispered suddenly, pointing, "coming through the trees." Harold squinted, making out 2 figures moving deliberately along their trail. The woman was in the lead now, her gray hair visible even at this distance. She moved with purpose but caution, clearly experienced in such terrain despite her formal attire. The man followed a few paces behind, constantly scanning their surroundings with the practiced vigilance of someone with security training. "FBI or Secret Service," Michael murmured, joining them at the window. "The way he moves, the way he's checking sight lines, that's federal training." "Or someone trained to imitate it," Harold countered, raising the shotgun to rest on the windowsill, not aiming but ready. "Sophia, get back from the window. Michael, cover the rear exit." As the figures drew closer, Harold could make out more details. The woman was in her 60s, her pantsuit practical despite its obvious quality. She carried herself with authority, shoulders squared, chin raised. The man was younger, perhaps 40, with the athletic build of someone who maintained rigorous physical training. They stopped at the edge of the clearing, the woman raising a hand to shade her eyes as she studied the cabin. Then, to Harold's surprise, she reached slowly into her jacket and withdrew what appeared to be a badge, holding it high above her head for them to see. "Harold Whitaker," she called, her voice carrying clearly across the clearing. "I'm Supreme Court Justice Elena Martinez," I'm here to help Eleanor and Sophia." Harold felt a jolt of recognition at the name, though he'd never met the woman personally. Her reputation as an incorruptible force on the bench had made her both famous and, in certain circles, notorious. "And the man with you?" Harold called back through the window, not lowering his shotgun. "Special Agent David Cho, my personal security detail," she replied. "Mr. Whitaker, I know you have reason to be cautious, but time is critical. Eleanor sent me the coordinates for your farm yesterday before she was attacked." Harold glanced at Sophia, who was peering around the edge of the window despite his instructions to stay back. "Is it her?" he asked quietly. "The woman who came to your apartment?" Sophia studied the distant figure for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "I think so. But Mom said not to trust anyone unless they knew the password." Harold raised his eyebrows in surprise. "Password? You didn't mention a password before." "I forgot," Sophia admitted, "with everything happening so fast. But Mom said Judge Martinez would know it if she was really on our side." Harold turned back to the window. "Justice Martinez," he called out. "My granddaughter says there's a password. If you're truly Eleanor's ally, you'll know it." The woman nodded, a hint of approval crossing her features at this precaution. "The password is Mockingbird Autumn." She paused, then added, "It's from the book Eleanor was reading when we first met. To Kill a Mockingbird. She had a first edition her mother gave her before she died." Harold felt a pang at the mention of his late wife, Clara, who had indeed gifted their daughter with the treasured book on her 12th birthday. It was the kind of detail that would be difficult for an impostor to know. He looked at Sophia, who was nodding vigorously. "That's it, Grandpa. That's the password." Harold lowered the shotgun, relief washing over him. "Michael, I think they're legitimate. Let's let them in." Michael appeared less convinced. "Uncle Harold, with all due respect, they could have forced that information from Eleanor." "If they had Eleanor and could force information from her, they'd already know exactly where Sophia is and what's in the envelope," Harold reasoned. "They wouldn't be following our trail through the woods. They'd have been waiting for us here." Michael considered this logic, then nodded reluctantly. "All right, but I want to check their credentials carefully before we discuss anything sensitive." Harold opened the cabin door, though he kept the shotgun within easy reach. Justice Martinez and Agent Cho crossed the clearing slowly, hands visible, making no sudden movements. "Thank you for your caution, Mr. Whitaker," Justice Martinez said as she reached the porch. "In your position, I would have done the same." She presented her credentials, which Michael examined thoroughly before nodding his approval. Agent Cho followed suit, his FBI identification equally legitimate. "Where's my mom?" Sophia asked the moment they entered the cabin, cutting through the adult formalities with a child's directness. "Is she okay?" Justice Martinez's face softened as she crouched to Sophia's level. "Your mother is alive, Sophia. She's in protective custody at a secure hospital. The men hurt her badly, but the doctors say she's going to recover." Tears filled Sophia's eyes, tears of relief rather than grief. "She's really okay?" "She's really okay," Martinez confirmed, "and very worried about you. Finding you safe was our top priority." She straightened, turning to Harold. "Mr. Whitaker, I understand Eleanor gave Sophia an envelope to deliver to you." Harold nodded, producing the envelope from his pocket. "We've looked at the contents. My name is on one of the lists, though I don't understand why." Justice Martinez's expression turned grave. "That's what I'm here to explain. But first, we need to move to a more secure location. Agent Cho has confirmed that we weren't followed from Washington, but Senator Whitridge has resources within multiple agencies. It's only a matter of time before they track us here." "Washington?" Michael echoed. "You came directly from D.C.? "As soon as we received Eleanor's emergency signal," Martinez confirmed. "Mr. Whitaker, the documents your daughter compiled represent the final piece of evidence in an investigation that's been ongoing for 3 years. A conspiracy that reaches into the highest levels of government. And your farm—" She paused, meeting Harold's gaze directly. "Your farm is the key to exposing it all." Harold stared at her in disbelief. "My farm? What could my property possibly have to do with political corruption?" "Everything," Justice Martinez replied solemnly. "Because beneath your fields lies the reason Senator Whitridge and his associates have been purchasing every property surrounding yours. The largest, untapped lithium deposit east of the Mississippi. A resource that will be essential for America's energy future, worth billions to whoever controls it." The revelation landed like a physical blow. Harold sank into a chair, trying to process the implications. His land, the soil he'd worked for over 5 decades, the legacy he'd fought to preserve, concealed a treasure that had unknowingly placed him and his family at the center of a deadly conspiracy. "How did Eleanor discover this?" he finally asked. "And how long have you known?" "That," Justice Martinez said, checking her watch, "is a conversation we need to have en route. Agent Cho's extraction team will be at the rendezvous point in 40 minutes. If we miss that window, I can't guarantee your safety." The journey back through the forest was tense but purposeful, with Agent Cho taking point and Justice Martinez bringing up the rear. Harold walked beside Sophia, his weathered hand gently guiding her around the worst of the mud and debris. Michael followed closely, constantly scanning the surroundings, newly alert to dangers that might have seemed paranoid just hours earlier. "The extraction point is an old logging road about 2 miles northeast of here," Agent Cho explained, consulting a handheld GPS device. "We have a secure vehicle waiting. From there, we'll rendezvous with the helicopter team." "Helicopter?" Harold echoed, his voice betraying his discomfort with the idea. In 78 years, he'd never once set foot in an aircraft of any kind. "Fastest way to get you to the safe house," Justice Martinez explained from behind them, "and the most difficult to track." As they walked, Martinez began to fill in the gaps in their understanding, her voice kept low but urgent. 3 years ago, a geological survey commissioned by the Department of Energy identified several potential lithium deposits throughout the eastern United States. Most were small, commercially unviable. But one, located primarily beneath your property, Mr. Whitaker, was significant enough to change the nation's energy independence calculations. "Why wasn't I informed?" Harold demanded, helping Sophia over a fallen tree. "The findings were classified," Martinez replied. "National security concerns, but someone in Senator Whitridge's office accessed the report illegally, shortly after a shell company began purchasing land surrounding your farm." Michael interjected, "The property's on the list in Eleanor's envelope." Martinez nodded. "Precisely. Land that contained portions of the lithium deposit, but not the main concentration. Your farm sits at the center of it all, the most valuable piece." "And they couldn't just use eminent domain?" Michael asked. "Force a sale legally?" "Normally, yes," Martinez acknowledged. But Whitridge and his associates didn't want the government to control the lithium. They wanted it for private exploitation, with foreign investment partners who are hostile to American interests. A direct national security threat, but one that would make them billions. Harold processed this information, his mind connecting dots that had previously seemed random. "The offers," he murmured. "I've had 6 different companies approach me in the past year, offering to buy my land at well above market value." "All controlled by Whitridge," Martinez confirmed. "When you refuse to sell, they move to more aggressive tactics." "Like attacking my daughter," Harold said, his voice hardening. Martinez's expression grew somber. Eleanor was assigned to investigate financial irregularities in Whitridge's campaign. She had no idea about the lithium connection initially, but she's brilliant. She started unraveling a complex web of shell companies, offshore accounts, and bribery. When her investigation led to the land acquisitions around your farm, she accessed the classified geological survey and realized why they wanted my property so badly, Harold finished. Yes. By then, she'd already gathered substantial evidence of corruption. The lithium conspiracy was the final piece, and the most damning. Whitridge wasn't just corrupt. He was committing treason by attempting to sell a strategic national resource to foreign actors. Sophia, who had been listening intently despite the difficult trek, looked up at Harold. That's why Mom was so scared, Grandpa. She said these were the kind of people who could make anyone disappear. The child's matter-of-fact statement sent a chill through Harold. His estranged daughter had been carrying this burden alone, protecting her child while pursuing justice at tremendous personal risk. Why didn't Eleanor come directly to you? Michael asked Justice Martinez. Why send Sophia to the farm first? Security protocols, Martinez replied. Eleanor suspected a leak within my office. She wouldn't risk direct contact until she'd secured both the evidence and her daughter. The justice's voice softened. She trusted her father to protect what mattered most to her. Harold felt a complex emotion well up within him. Pride in Eleanor's courage, grief for the years of estrangement, and a renewed determination to honor the trust she'd placed in him. Agent Cho held up a hand, bringing the group to a halt. We're approaching the extraction point, he said quietly. Stay here while I verify the teams in position. As Cho moved ahead, Justice Martinez withdrew a satellite phone from her jacket. I need to check in with my security coordinator, she explained, stepping a few paces away for privacy. Harold took the opportunity to confer with Michael. What do you make of all this? He asked, keeping his voice low. Michael shook his head, his expression troubled. It's almost too fantastic to believe. But it explains everything. The land purchases, the pressure on you to sell, Eleanor's investigation. He glanced at Sophia, who had crouched down to examine a colorful mushroom, momentarily distracted from their dire situation. What concerns me is the reach these people seem to have. If a U.S. senator can command this kind of operation, then nowhere is truly safe, Harold finished. Not unless Whitridge and his entire network are exposed. Which is exactly what we intend to do, Justice Martinez said, rejoining them. Eleanor's evidence, combined with what we've already gathered, is enough for indictments. But we need you and Sophia to testify about the intimidation tactics, the direct link between the conspiracy and the violent methods used to further it. Harold nodded, though the prospect of testifying against powerful political figures was daunting, even for a man not easily intimidated. What about my farm? He asked. What happens to the land? Once this is over, the government will likely approach you about proper mineral rights, Martinez answered honestly. But it will be above board, fair, and with full transparency. You won't lose your farm, Mr. Whitaker, and you'll be compensated fairly for any extraction. Agent Cho returned, his expression tense. We have a problem, he reported. No sign of the extraction team, and there are fresh tire tracks on the logging road. Martinez's hand moved instinctively to the weapon concealed beneath her jacket. Whitridge's people? Can't confirm, but it doesn't look good. The tracks indicate multiple vehicles recently arrived. Cho consulted his GPS again. There's another extraction point, but it's 4 miles further, and we'd have to move at night. We don't have time for that, Martinez said, checking her watch. If they found the first extraction point, they'll be sweeping the area systematically. We need a diversion. Michael stepped forward. I know these woods better than anyone. I could lead them away, give you time to reach the secondary location. Absolutely not, Harold objected immediately. It's too dangerous. Uncle Harold, I'm the logical choice, Michael insisted. I'm familiar with the terrain, I'm faster than you, and I don't need to testify. They'd only hold me long enough to realize I don't have the envelope or Sophia. Agent Cho and Justice Martinez exchanged a look that suggested they were seriously considering the offer. It could work, Cho admitted. If Dr. Peterson can draw their search team south, we can circle around to the northeast. Harold shook his head adamantly. I won't risk my nephew's life. There has to be another way. "Grandpa," Sophia said quietly, tugging at his sleeve. "There's a cave." All eyes turned to the child. "What cave, Sophia?" Harold asked. "Mom showed me pictures," she explained, "from when she was little. She said you used to take her to a cave to fish in the underground stream. She said it was your special place." Harold's eyes widened in recognition. "Black Rock Cave," he breathed. "I'd almost forgotten about it. It's been at least 30 years since I've been there." "Is it nearby?" Agent Cho asked, clearly intrigued by this new option. Harold oriented himself, calculating their position relative to the landmarks he could identify. "About half a mile west. The entrance is well hidden. You'd never find it if you didn't know exactly where to look. And it has a back exit that comes out near Miller's Creek." "How far is that from the secondary extraction point?" Martinez asked Cho. The agent consulted his GPS. "If it's the creek I'm thinking of, not far at all. We could reach it by nightfall." "Then that's our plan," Martinez decided. "Mr. Whitaker, you lead us to this cave. We'll use it to bypass Whitridge's search teams entirely." As they altered course, heading west toward Black Rock Cave, Harold found himself marveling at the strange turns his life had taken. The cave had been a special place for him and Eleanor, a father-daughter retreat where they'd fished for blind cavefish and explored the underground passages with childish wonder. That Eleanor had remembered it, had even told Sophia about it, suggested that perhaps the rift between them wasn't as complete as he'd believed all these years. Now, that cherished memory might save all their lives. A hidden path beneath the earth, leading them away from danger and toward justice. There was a poetry to it that wasn't lost on Harold, even as they quickened their pace toward the concealed entrance that hadn't felt the tread of his boots in 3 decades. Black Rock Cave revealed itself not as the dramatic gaping maw that caves in movies often were, but as a narrow, unremarkable fissure in a limestone outcropping, partially concealed by a tangle of vegetation and fallen debris from the recent storm. The entrance would be easily overlooked by anyone not specifically searching for it, a fact that Harold hoped would work to their advantage now. "This is it?" Agent Cho asked, his doubt evident as he surveyed what appeared to be little more than a crack in the rock face. "Appearances can be deceiving," Harold replied, moving forward to clear away some of the branches blocking the entrance. "The passage widens considerably once you're inside. Clara, my late wife, used to say it was nature's lesson about judging books by their covers." Justice Martinez smiled at this. "Your wife sounds like she was a wise woman, Mr. Whitaker." "The wisest I've ever known," Harold answered simply, a brief shadow of grief passing across his weathered features before he returned to the task at hand. "We'll need light. The cave gets pitch dark about 20 feet in." Agent Cho produced a tactical flashlight from his jacket. "Standard equipment. I have a smaller backup as well." Michael retrieved a small emergency flashlight from his medical pack, while Justice Martinez activated the flashlight function on her satellite phone. Harold nodded, satisfied with their preparations. "I'll go first," he decided. "Sophia, you follow right behind me. Stay close enough to touch my jacket at all times. The path is mostly smooth, but there are spots where the footing can be tricky." "What about Rusty?" Sophia asked, concern for the old dog evident in her voice. Harold had almost forgotten the retriever, who had been following them faithfully despite his age and the difficult terrain. "He knows the way," Harold assured her, though in truth he wasn't certain the dog would remember a cave he hadn't visited in decades. "Rusty, come on, boy." The old dog seemed to hesitate, sniffing at the cave entrance with evident suspicion, but his loyalty to Harold ultimately won out. With a soft whine, he padded into the darkness ahead of them, as if reclaiming his role as scout. One by one they entered the narrow opening, Harold leading the way with Sophia close behind, followed by Michael, Justice Martinez, and Agent Cho bringing up the rear. As Harold had promised, the passage quickly widened into a tunnel tall enough for even Michael, the tallest among them, to stand upright. The beams of their flashlights revealed a natural cathedral of stone, water-carved over countless millennia. Stalactites hung from the ceiling like nature's chandeliers, while the ground beneath their feet was mostly smooth, interspersed with occasional boulders and rock formations that required careful navigation. "It's beautiful," Sophia whispered, her young voice filled with wonder despite the circumstances that had brought them here. "Your mother used to say it was like walking into a fairy tale," Harold told her, feeling a warm rush of memory. "The first time I brought her here, she was about your age. She spent hours naming all the rock formations. That one there was the wizard's hat, and over there was the sleeping dragon." Sophia peered in the direction his flashlight indicated, her imagination clearly engaged in seeing the same shapes her mother had once discerned in the stone. "I can see it," she exclaimed softly. "The dragon." For a brief moment, the tension that had gripped them since fleeing the farm seemed to ease, replaced by the simple joy of a grandfather sharing a piece of her mother's childhood with a receptive granddaughter. But the moment was short-lived. "How much further to the other exit?" Agent Cho asked from the rear, his professional focus unwavering. Harold pulled himself back to the present concern. "About half a mile through the main passage, then a series of smaller tunnels that lead to the exit near Miller's Creek. There's an underground stream we'll have to cross, but it's shallow this time of year." They continued deeper into the cave system, the sounds of their footsteps creating gentle echoes around them. Harold was grateful to find that his memory of the route remained accurate, despite the decades since his last visit. His body seemed to remember what his conscious mind had partially forgotten, automatically adjusting to avoid low-hanging formations or uneven sections of ground. Rusty had fully embraced his role as advance scout, trotting ahead with newfound energy, occasionally turning back as if to ensure they were following correctly. The dog's behavior reassured Harold. Animals often sense danger in ways humans couldn't, and Rusty's calm demeanor suggested they weren't heading into immediate peril. After about 20 minutes of steady progress, they reached the underground stream, a ribbon of crystal-clear water flowing across their path, disappearing into a smaller tunnel to their left. The water reflected their flashlight beams, creating dancing patterns on the cave ceiling. "We cross here," Harold instructed. "The water's probably no more than ankle deep, but the stones can be slippery." He led the way, stepping carefully into the cold stream, his boots providing adequate protection against the chill. Sophia followed, holding tightly to his hand, her borrowed boots keeping her feet dry despite the water's depth. One by one, they crossed without incident, though Michael nearly lost his balance on a particularly smooth stone. On the other side, the main passage split into 3 distinct tunnels. Harold paused, frowning slightly as he played his flashlight across the options. "The right passage," he decided after a moment's consideration. "It's narrower, but it leads most directly to the exit." Just as they were about to proceed, Rusty froze, his ears perking up. A low growl rumbled in the old dog's throat, a warning that stopped them all in their tracks. "What is it, boy?" Harold whispered, instinctively dimming his flashlight. The others followed suit, reducing their lights to the minimum necessary to avoid complete darkness. In the new near silence, they could all hear what had alerted Rusty, distant voices, echoing faintly from the direction they had come. "They've found the cave entrance," Agent Cho said, his voice a bare whisper. "Probably following our tracks from where we diverted from the original path." Justice Martinez's face hardened in the dim light. "How many alternate routes are there through this cave system, Mr. Whitaker?" "Several," Harold replied, thinking quickly. "But only one that I know leads to a viable exit. The others either circle back or end in chambers with no way out." "Could we use that to our advantage?" Michael suggested. "Lead them down a false trail?" Agent Cho nodded, immediately grasping the strategy. "A diversion. I could leave obvious signs heading down one of the dead-end passages. Make them think we went that way." "It's too dangerous," Justice Martinez objected. If they catch you— With respect, Your Honor, it's our best option, Cho interrupted. I'm trained for this. The rest of you need to get to the extraction point with the evidence and Sophia. Harold could see the logic, much as he disliked the idea of splitting up. If Whitridge's men caught up to them all together, the consequences could be disastrous. This way, at least most of their group had a chance to reach safety. The left passage loops around and eventually dead ends in a large chamber, Harold informed Cho. If you leave them a trail to follow, you could double back through that small tunnel we passed about 50 yards back. It connects to the right passage further along. Cho committed the directions to memory with a sharp nod. I'll rendezvous with you before the exit if possible. If not, get to the extraction point and don't wait for me. Justice Martinez reluctantly agreed to the plan. Be careful, David. These men aren't just hired muscle. They're likely former military or intelligence, working for Whitridge's private security firm. I'm aware of their probable backgrounds, Cho replied, his expression grim but determined. Which is why I won't engage unless absolutely necessary. This is about delay, not confrontation. They worked quickly to implement the plan. Cho removed his jacket, deliberately scuffing it against the cave wall near the left passage entrance to leave fibers behind. He used the same jacket to wipe away their actual footprints leading toward the right passage, then created obvious wet footprints heading into the left tunnel. That should buy us some time, he said, shrugging his jacket back on. I'll create more obvious signs further in, then use the connecting tunnel to rejoin you. Harold watched the agent disappear into the left passage, a sense of foreboding settling over him despite the logical soundness of the plan. In his long life, he'd learned that even the best-laid plans often went awry, especially when desperate men with power and resources were involved. We need to move quickly, Justice Martinez urged, now taking the lead in Cho's absence. The more distance we put between us and the entrance, the better. As they hurried along the right passage, Harold found himself reaching for Sophia's hand, drawing strength from the small fingers that gripped his own with complete trust. Whatever happened, he silently vowed, this child, Eleanor's child, his blood, would come through safely, even if it meant he wouldn't. The right passage narrowed significantly as they progressed, forcing them to proceed in single file. Harold led the way, his flashlight beam revealing a path that seemed to be closing in around them like a tightening fist. Occasionally, he would pause to help Sophia navigate particularly difficult sections, lifting her over jutting rocks or guiding her around treacherous drops. You're doing great, child, he encouraged, watching with pride as his granddaughter faced each obstacle with silent determination. In her, he could see echoes of Eleanor's resilience, the same stubborn courage that had driven his daughter to pursue justice regardless of personal cost. Justice Martinez followed closely behind Sophia, her breath coming in controlled, measured inhalations that betrayed her exertion despite her attempt to conceal it. Michael brought up the rear, frequently pausing to listen for sounds of pursuit, his medical bag clutched tightly against his side. Rusty had adjusted his pace to stay close to Sophia, the old dog, seemingly having adopted her protection as his primary mission. Harold found himself grateful for the animal's loyalty, knowing that Rusty would alert them to danger long before human senses could detect it. Mr. Whitaker, Justice Martinez called softly from behind. Have you considered what happens if Agent Cho's diversion doesn't work? Harold didn't slow his pace as he answered. Been thinking about little else. This passage has a few spots where we might be able to create our own diversion if necessary. Such as? Martinez pressed. About a quarter-mile ahead, there's a section where the ceiling's unstable. Years back, a small tremor caused a partial collapse. Never cleared it fully, just enough to keep the passage open. If needed, we could bring down more rock to block the path behind us. Michael spoke up from the rear. Creating a cave-in sounds risky, Uncle Harold. We could trap ourselves if we're not careful. Not saying it's ideal, Harold conceded. Just saying it's an option if things get desperate. They continued in silence for several minutes, the only sounds their footsteps and the occasional drip of water from the cave ceiling. Harold estimated they'd covered about half the distance to the exit when Rusty suddenly stopped, his ears pricking forward, body tensing. Everyone froze, instinctively dimming their lights again. In the near darkness, they listened intently, straining to hear what had alerted the retriever. At first, Harold detected nothing. Then a faint sound, barely perceptible. Not from behind them, as he'd feared, but from ahead. The sound of approaching footsteps. "Someone's coming from the direction of the exit," Michael whispered, unnecessarily stating what they'd all realized. Justice Martinez drew her weapon with practiced efficiency. They must have known about the second entrance. Whitridge's people have the cave surrounded. Harold's mind raced. If armed men were approaching from both directions, they were effectively trapped. The narrow confines of the passage left few options for evasion or confrontation. "The side chamber," he whispered, memory suddenly providing a potential salvation. "There's a small chamber about 30 yards back. It's tight, but it might hide us." Without waiting for agreement, Harold began guiding them back the way they had come. Time was critical. They needed to reach the hidden chamber before they were caught in the convergence of the two approaching groups. They retraced their steps with as much speed as silence would allow, Harold counting the distinctive formations they passed. "Here," he finally whispered, pointing his flashlight at what appeared to be merely a slight indentation in the cave wall. Upon closer inspection, however, the indentation revealed itself to be a narrow opening, easily overlooked unless one knew exactly what to search for. Harold gestured for Sophia to go first, helping the child squeeze through the tight space. Justice Martinez followed, then Michael, who had to turn sideways to accommodate his broader shoulders. Harold urged Rusty through next, the old dog initially resistant, but eventually complying with his master's insistent commands. Harold himself was the last to enter, his aged body protesting the contortion required to slip through the opening. The chamber beyond was larger than the narrow entrance suggested, roughly the size of a small bedroom, with a ceiling just high enough for the adults to stand upright. Most importantly, it was completely hidden from the main passage, unless one knew precisely where to look. "Kill the lights," Justice Martinez instructed once they were all inside. They might see the glow through the crack. In the sudden darkness, Harold felt Sophia press against his side, her small body trembling slightly. He put his arm around her shoulders, drawing her close. "Steady now," he whispered. "We'll be all right." They waited in tense silence, ears straining for sounds from the main passage. It wasn't long before they heard what they'd been dreading. Multiple sets of footsteps and the murmur of voices approaching from both directions. "Anything!" a gruff voice demanded, now clearly audible through the rock wall separating them from the main passage. "No sign of them yet," another voice responded from the opposite direction. "But they have to be in here somewhere. The sensors at the farm entrance picked up 5 individuals entering, and we've got the creek exit covered." "Sensors?" Michael breathed. The word barely audible even in the confined space of their hiding place. Harold felt a cold realization sink through him. The storm had knocked out his farm's electrical power, but battery-powered surveillance equipment would have continued functioning. They'd been monitored from the moment they entered the cave. "Keep searching," the first voice commanded. "Covington wants the girl and the documents. The others are expendable." The voices and footsteps grew fainter as the search parties continued past their hiding place, apparently missing the concealed entrance to the chamber. When the sounds had receded to a safe distance, Justice Martinez activated her satellite phone's flashlight at its lowest setting, casting just enough illumination for them to see one another's faces. "They've got both exits covered, and they know exactly how many of us are in the cave system," she stated grimly, "including Agent Cho." "And they mentioned someone named Covington," Michael added, "not Whitridge." Martinez's expression darkened. "Lawrence Covington, Whitridge's chief of staff and former intelligence operative. If he's running the operation personally, Our situation is even more precarious than I thought. Harold found his mind returning to the geological survey Martinez had mentioned earlier. This lithium deposit, he said slowly. Just how valuable is it? Current estimates place it at approximately $20 billion, Martinez replied. But its strategic value far exceeds the monetary worth. Whoever controls it gains significant leverage in the emerging green energy economy. 20 billion, Harold repeated, the figure almost incomprehensible to a man who had spent his life farming 50 acres of modest cropland. And Whitridge and his people are willing to kill for it. They've already killed, Martinez corrected. 2 whistleblowers from the Department of Energy disappeared after raising concerns about the classified survey being accessed without authorization. Their bodies were never found. Sophia, who had been silent throughout this exchange, suddenly spoke up. Mom said they'd never stop coming, she said, her young voice steady despite the fear evident in her eyes. That's why she gave me the envelope and sent me to find Grandpa. Harold felt a surge of both pride and sorrow at the child's words. She understood, perhaps better than any of them, the gravity of their situation. Eleanor had prepared her daughter not just with the evidence and instructions, but with the harsh truth about the danger they faced. "What's our next move?" Michael asked, directing the question to both Harold and Justice Martinez, acknowledging the unexpected partnership that had formed between the elderly farmer and the Supreme Court justice. Martinez checked her satellite phone. The extraction team will be waiting at the secondary location until dawn. After that, they'll have to withdraw due to increased risk of detection. Dawn's about 6 hours away, Harold calculated, and we're trapped in a cave with armed men searching from both directions. For a moment, the hopelessness of their situation seemed overwhelming. Then Sophia tugged at Harold's sleeve, drawing his attention. "Grandpa," she whispered, "Mom told me about another way out. She said you showed her a secret tunnel when she was little, a tunnel so small that grown-ups couldn't follow." Harold's eyes widened as memory clicked into place. "The wishing well," he breathed. "I'd forgotten all about it." "The wishing well," Justice Martinez repeated, confusion evident in her hushed voice. "What wishing well?" Harold's mind raced back through decades of memories, retrieving details long forgotten. "It's not really a well," he explained. "It's what Eleanor called it when she was little. There's a vertical shaft in the northeast corner of this chamber that connects to a series of narrow tunnels. Local legend says the indigenous people used it as an escape route during conflicts with early settlers." "Is it viable?" Martinez asked, her professional detachment returning now that a potential solution had presented itself. "Could we actually use it to get out?" Harold hesitated. "For some of us, maybe. The initial shaft is tight, very tight. It narrows to about 18 inches at its slimmest point. After that, it widens into tunnels that eventually surface about a quarter-mile east of Miller's Creek." Michael glanced toward the chamber's dark corner. 18 inches is going to be a challenge for any adult, he observed, the clinical assessment of a doctor evident in his tone. "I can fit," Sophia volunteered immediately. "And Rusty, too, probably." Harold shook his head firmly. "We're not sending you alone, child." "I believe I could manage the passage as well," Justice Martinez said, surprising them. At their questioning looks, she added with a hint of defensiveness, "Rock climbing and caving were hobbies before my appointment to the bench. I've navigated tighter spaces than 18 inches. "That still leaves Michael and me," Harold pointed out, "and I doubt either of us could squeeze through." Michael moved toward the northeast corner, playing his dimmed flashlight along the rock wall. "Where exactly is this shaft, Uncle Harold?" Harold joined him, running his weathered hand along the seemingly solid rock face until he found what he was searching for. A slight change in texture, a seam almost invisible to the eye, but detectable to knowing fingers. "Here," he said. "We covered it with loose rocks the last time we visited." Eleanor was getting too big to fit through, and I was worried she might try it alone. Together they carefully removed the stones that had concealed the opening for decades, revealing a narrow vertical shaft that disappeared into darkness. The passage was as tight as Harold remembered, perhaps even more so to his elderly eyes. Justice Martinez examined the opening with the clinical assessment of someone evaluating a tactical option. "Sophia could definitely manage this," she said, "and I believe I could as well, though it would be snug." "But what's the point if we can't all go?" Michael asked, voicing the obvious concern. "The point," Martinez replied, "is getting Sophia and the evidence to safety. That's our primary mission." Harold felt a protest forming immediately. The idea of sending his granddaughter through that dark, narrow passage, even with Justice Martinez, struck him as deeply wrong. Yet he couldn't deny the logic. If Whitridge's men captured them all, the evidence would be destroyed, and Sophia's safety would be compromised. "What about Agent Cho?" he asked instead. "He's still out there, potentially risking his life to create a diversion for us." "Agent Cho understands the mission parameters," Martinez said, her tone gentle but firm. "The protection of the witness and preservation of evidence take precedence over all other considerations, including his safety and ours." The harsh reality of their situation settled over the group like the weight of the mountain above them. They had found themselves players in a game with stakes far higher than any of them had anticipated when the storm had first driven Sophia to Harold's door. "I don't like it," Harold said finally, "but I understand the necessity. If Sophia and the evidence can get out safely, you can bring back help for the rest of us." "Exactly," Martinez agreed. "It's not abandonment. It's a tactical withdrawal to secure reinforcements." Sophia, who had been listening to this exchange with solemn attention, spoke up. "I'm not afraid of the tunnel, Grandpa. Mom said you used to tell her it was a magic passage for the very brave." Harold felt his throat tighten at this evidence that Eleanor had shared these memories with her daughter, preserving a connection to him despite their estrangement. "That's right," he managed, "but you mustn't go alone. Justice Martinez will accompany you." Martinez nodded, already removing her jacket and anything else that might impede her progress through the narrow shaft. "We'll need to move quickly. How long would you estimate the journey through this passage takes, Mr. Whitaker?" "Hard to say," Harold admitted. "Eleanor and I never went all the way through. Based on local stories, I'd guess around 30 minutes from here to the surface exit." "That's manageable," Martinez said. "Once we're out, we'll make directly for the secondary extraction point. When we're clear, I'll alert the FBI tactical response team waiting with the helicopter. They can approach the cave exits from multiple angles, creating enough confusion to extract you and Dr. Peterson safely." Michael had been examining the passage more carefully while they talked. The initial descent appears to be about 15 feet before it transitions to a more horizontal path, he observed. "We'll need to lower Sophia down carefully." They quickly improvised a harness using Michael's belt and the strap from his medical bag, creating a secure way to lower Sophia into the shaft. Rusty would have to make the descent on his own, though Harold worried about the old dog's ability to navigate such a restrictive space. "Are we certain the dog needs to go?" Martinez asked, clearly thinking along similar lines. "He could remain with you." "Rusty stays with Sophia," Harold said with finality. "That dog's the best protection she could have. He'll hear or smell danger long before you will, Your Honor." Martinez accepted this with a nod, recognizing the wisdom in the arrangement. They worked quickly but methodically, preparing for the separation that none of them wanted, but all recognized as necessary. When all was ready, Harold crouched before Sophia, taking her small hands in his gnarled ones. "You listen to Justice Martinez," he instructed, struggling to keep his voice steady. "Do exactly as she says and stay quiet no matter what." Sophia nodded solemnly, then surprised him by throwing her arms around his neck in a fierce hug. "I'll be brave, Grandpa," she whispered. "Like Mom." like you." Harold held her tightly for a moment, then released her, not trusting himself to speak. Michael stepped forward, giving the child a reassuring smile. "Remember everything we've taught you," he said. "And here." He pressed a small emergency flashlight into her hand. "Just in case." Justice Martinez had finished her preparations, stripping down to the essentials she could carry through the tight passage. "We should proceed," she said quietly, "before the search parties circle back to this section." With grim efficiency, they secured the improvised harness around Sophia and began lowering her into the vertical shaft. The child showed remarkable composure, offering no complaint as she was suspended over the dark opening. "I can see the bottom," she reported in a hushed voice. "It's not too far." When her feet touched the base of the shaft, they carefully unhooked the harness and pulled it back up. Rusty, watching these proceedings with evident anxiety, needed several encouragements before he would approach the opening. Finally, with a soft whine of protest, the old dog lowered himself into the shaft, scrabbling somewhat awkwardly, but managing the descent. Now it was Justice Martinez's turn. The Supreme Court justice showed none of the hesitation one might expect from a person of her position and age, approaching the tight passage with grim determination. "The extraction team will be at these coordinates," she said, showing Michael the location on her satellite phone. "When we reach them, I'll send in the tactical unit." She slipped the phone into her pocket and turned to Harold. "Mr. Whitaker, I promise you, I will protect your granddaughter with my life." Harold nodded, recognizing the sincerity in her words. "Godspeed, Your Honor." With surprising agility, Martinez lowered herself into the shaft, her slender frame just managing to slip through the narrow opening. For a tense moment, she appeared to stick at the tightest section. But with a twist of her shoulders, she continued her descent until she reached the bottom, where Sophia and Rusty waited. "We're clear," her voice echoed up to them. "Proceeding to the horizontal passage now. Remember, wait for the tactical team. Do not attempt to fight your way out." "Understood," Michael called down softly. "Good luck." They watched until the faint glow of Martinez's light disappeared into the horizontal tunnel, taking with it their best hope for rescue and justice. Harold and Michael carefully replaced some of the stones around the opening, not completely covering it as before, but enough to make it less noticeable to a casual search. When they had finished, they extinguished their lights and settled back to wait in the darkness, each lost in his own thoughts. The sounds of the search parties had faded completely, though whether that was a good sign or merely an indication that Whitridge's men were being more cautious in their approach, neither could say. "Do you think they'll make it?" Michael finally asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Harold considered the question, weighing optimism against reality. "If anyone can get her through safely, it's that judge," he said at last. "There's steel in that woman. Reminds me of Eleanor in some ways. And us? What are our chances when the search parties return?" Harold didn't answer immediately. After a lifetime of facing challenges head-on, he found it strangely liberating to acknowledge the direness of their situation. "Slim," he admitted finally, "but not zero. And sometimes, Michael, slim is all you need." Time passed with excruciating slowness in the darkness of the hidden chamber. Harold and Michael sat with their backs against opposite walls, conserving the batteries in their flashlights by keeping them off except for brief, necessary moments. The silence was punctuated only by their breathing and the occasional distant sound from the main passage, evidence that the search continued, though mercifully not yet in their immediate vicinity. Harold found his thoughts drifting to Eleanor. What had the last 30 years been like for his daughter? He knew the bare facts of her career, her law degree, her position with the state attorney general's office, her eventual move to federal prosecution, but he knew nothing of the woman she had become, the life she had built, the challenges she had faced as a single mother raising Sophia. Had she been happy? Had she ever thought of reaching out to him before circumstances forced her hand? The questions gnawed at him, regrets crystallizing in the darkness. "You're thinking about Eleanor," Michael said quietly, as if reading his thoughts. Harold grunted in affirmation. 30 years, Michael. 30 years of stubborn silence on both sides. And for what? Pride? Principle? "You both believed you were right," Michael offered. "That's the Whitaker way." "Cold comfort now," Harold replied. "My daughter's fighting for her life in some hospital, and I don't even know which one. My granddaughter's crawling through a tunnel that might collapse or might be guarded at the other end. All because I was too proud to make the first move toward reconciliation." Michael was silent for a long moment before responding. "Eleanor made her choices too, Uncle Harold. She could have reached out just as easily as you could have." "She was barely 18 when she left," Harold said, the weight of responsibility heavy in his voice. "I was the parent. It should have been on me to bridge the gap." "Maybe," Michael conceded, "but dwelling on it now doesn't help anyone. What matters is what we do next." Harold appreciated his nephew's pragmatism. It was a quality that had served Michael well in his medical practice and personal life. "And what exactly do you propose we do next, trapped in this hole in the ground?" "We prepare," Michael said simply. "Martinez and Sophia have been gone about 30 minutes. Best case scenario, they've reached the surface and are en route to the extraction point. That gives us perhaps 2 hours before any rescue team could reach us." "And worst case?" Harold asked, though he already knew the answer. "Worst case, they didn't make it through," Michael acknowledged. "In which case, we're on our own." Harold nodded in the darkness, appreciating his nephew's honesty. "Then we plan for both possibilities. If a rescue team comes, we need to be ready to move quickly. If not..." He let the alternative hang unspoken between them. Michael activated his flashlight briefly, illuminating the chamber just long enough to check his watch. "It's been nearly an hour since we last heard anyone in the main passage. They might have focused their search elsewhere for now. Or they might be waiting silently, hoping we'll reveal ourselves," Harold countered. "Either way, we can't just sit here indefinitely," Michael pointed out. "We're going to need water soon and eventually food. Plus, we have no idea what's happened to Agent Cho." Harold had been thinking about the FBI agent as well. Had his diversion worked? Was he still free, evading the search parties? Or had he been captured? Or worse? A sudden noise from the main passage silenced their conversation. The unmistakable sound of footsteps approaching, moving slowly but deliberately. Harold and Michael froze, barely breathing as the footsteps grew closer, then stopped directly outside their hiding place. "Signal's strongest right here," a voice said, the words clear despite being muffled by the rock wall separating them. "They've got to be nearby." "There's nothing here," another voice objected. "Just solid rock." "The scanner doesn't lie. Something with a power source is within 20 feet of us." Harold's heart sank as he realized their fatal mistake. Justice Martinez's satellite phone might be gone, but they still had flashlights. Electronics that could be detected by the right equipment. He and Michael exchanged alarmed glances in the darkness, both coming to the same realization. "Check for hidden entrances," the first voice commanded. "Tap the walls, look for seams. There are old mining tunnels all through these hills. Could be a concealed side passage." The sound of hands patting against rock grew louder as the searchers began methodically examining the walls of the main passage, working their way closer to the camouflaged entrance to their chamber. Michael leaned close to Harold's ear. "We need a diversion," he whispered, his breath barely stirring the air. Harold nodded, mind racing. They had few options and less time. Soon the searchers would find the disguised opening, and they would be cornered with nowhere to run. "The shaft," Harold breathed back. "It's our only chance." Michael's eyes widened in the darkness, understanding immediately. "You said yourself we can't fit." "Not comfortably," Harold agreed. but necessity makes for strange contortions. Before Michael could object further, a sharp rapping sounded directly on the other side of their concealment. "There's something here," one of the voices announced triumphantly. "The rock sounds different. I think it's hollow behind this section." Time had run out. With a resigned nod, Michael conceded to Harold's desperate plan. They moved silently to the partially concealed shaft, removing the remaining stones as quietly as possible. The vertical tunnel gaped before them like a dark throat, narrow and forbidding. "You first," Harold whispered. "You're younger, more flexible." Michael hesitated, then nodded grimly. He removed his jacket and medical bag, keeping only the essentials in his pockets. With a deep breath, he lowered himself into the opening feet first, his broad shoulders immediately catching on the narrow walls. For a heart-stopping moment, Harold thought his nephew would be stuck before he even began the descent. But Michael twisted sideways, compressing his chest in a way that looked painfully uncomfortable, and managed to slip further into the shaft. "It's tight," he ground out, his voice strained with the effort of squeezing through the restrictive space. "Very tight, but I think—" He twisted again, disappearing further into the darkness. "I think I can make it." Outside their hiding place, the sounds of discovery grew more urgent. "There's definitely something here. Help me move these rocks." Harold knew he had seconds, not minutes, before they broke through. With Michael now fully in the shaft and descending with agonizing slowness, Harold prepared to follow. At 78, with arthritic joints and a body less forgiving than it had once been, he harbored few illusions about his chances of making it through the narrowest section. But facing Whitridge's men, with no weapon and no escape route, seemed an even grimmer prospect. He lowered himself into the opening, just as the sound of rocks being pulled away from the chamber entrance grew louder. His shoulders immediately wedged tight, the unyielding stone pressing against his collarbones with bruising force. Harold grimaced, trying to rotate as Michael had done, but his less flexible frame resisted the movement. "Uncle Harold!" Michael's urgent whisper floated up from below. "Are you coming?" "Trying," Harold grunted, forcing his body to twist despite the protest of ancient injuries and arthritic joints. The pain was immediate and intense, but he pushed through it, driven by desperation. Inch by excruciating inch, Harold descended into the shaft, his progress marked by suppressed groans, as his elderly body endured contortions it was never meant to attempt. Behind him, he could hear the entrance to their hiding place being breached, stones clattering to the ground as the searchers broke through. "There's a chamber here," a voice called, no longer muffled. "Flashlight marks on the floor. They were here recently." Harold struggled to move faster, knowing discovery was imminent. He had managed to descend about halfway down the shaft, his upper body through the narrowest section, but his hips now caught where the passage constricted. The pain in his joints had become a fiery agony, but fear provided a powerful anesthetic. "Uncle Harold," Michael urged from below. "They're going to find the shaft any second. You have to push through." With a final, supreme effort, Harold forced his body past the constriction point, feeling something tear in his hip as he did so. The pain nearly caused him to lose his grip, but he maintained his tenuous hold on the rock face, continuing his descent one agonizing inch at a time. Above him, flashlight beams suddenly illuminated the chamber he had just left. "Over here," a voice shouted. "There's another passage. They went down this shaft." Harold reached the bottom just as the first searcher's face appeared at the opening above. Michael grabbed his arm, pulling him into the horizontal tunnel that led away from the shaft's base. "Stop! Federal agents!" the voice from above commanded, the false claim confirming Justice Martinez's warnings about Whitridge's men impersonating law enforcement. Michael ignored the command, helping Harold crawl into the narrow tunnel as quickly as his injured hip would allow. They had perhaps a 30-second head start before the first pursuer could navigate the shaft, assuming he could fit through at all. "Can you move?" Michael asked urgently, his medical training evident in the quick assessing glance he gave Harold's twisted posture. No choice, Harold replied through gritted teeth, forcing himself forward despite the white-hot pain radiating from his hip. Keep going. Don't wait for me. But Michael ignored this instruction, staying close behind his uncle, occasionally helping to pull him forward when a particularly difficult section of tunnel challenged Harold's compromised mobility. Behind them, they could hear their pursuers shouting to each other, debating whether to follow through the shaft or continue searching for another way to intercept them. The decision was apparently made for pursuit, as the sounds of someone entering the vertical passage echoed through the stone corridor. "Faster!" Michael urged. "They're coming." The tunnel seemed endless, a serpentine passage barely wide enough for Harold's shoulders. Every movement sent jagged pain through his injured hip, but he pushed forward, driven by a determination that transcended physical suffering. Behind him, Michael provided steady encouragement and occasional assistance, while further back, the sounds of pursuit grew more distant rather than closer, suggesting their pursuers were having difficulty navigating the narrow confines. "We might be outpacing them," Michael whispered, pausing to help Harold over a particularly challenging rise in the tunnel floor. "The passage seems to be getting wider, too." Harold nodded, conserving his breath for the grueling effort of movement. His world had contracted to this immediate challenge. Advance, endure, survive. Everything else, the farm, the conspiracy, even Sophia and Eleanor, had receded temporarily from his conscious thoughts, replaced by the primal drive to escape. They continued for what felt like hours but was likely only 20 minutes, the tunnel gradually widening as Michael had observed. Eventually, it opened into a small chamber, perhaps 8 feet across, where several passages converged. "Which way?" Michael asked, playing his flashlight across the 3 potential paths. Harold slumped against the rock wall, the brief respite allowing pain to flood back into his awareness. "Not sure," he managed between labored breaths. "Eleanor and I never came this far." Michael frowned, considering their options. "Logic suggests we take the path that appears to slope upward. If the exit emerges near Miller's Creek, as you believed, we should be heading toward the surface." Before Harold could respond, a distant shout echoed through the tunnel they had just traversed, their pursuers still following, though significantly behind now. "No time to debate," Harold said, forcing himself upright despite the protest from his hip. "Upward path it is." This new tunnel was a blessing compared to what they had endured. Tall enough to almost stand upright in places, and wide enough that Harold no longer had to twist sideways to progress. They moved as quickly as Harold's injury would allow, the sounds of pursuit fading to silence behind them. "Fresh air," Michael suddenly announced, lifting his head. "I can feel a draft." Harold felt it too, a subtle movement of air against his face, carrying the faintest scent of pine and damp earth. They were nearing an exit. Hope, which had been a distant companion during their underground ordeal, surged within him. The tunnel began to slope more steeply upward, the floor becoming treacherous with loose stones and mud. Twice Harold slipped, the second time twisting his injured hip again and drawing an involuntary cry of pain. "Let me help you," Michael insisted, positioning himself to support Harold's weight on his injured side. "I can manage." Harold started to object, but the look on his nephew's face silenced further protest. Together, they navigated the increasingly steep incline. A patch of deeper darkness appeared ahead. Not the absolute black of the tunnel, but the softer darkness of night sky. The exit was just yards away now, a jagged opening partially concealed by brush and fallen logs. Michael helped Harold traverse the final distance, then paused just short of the opening. "We should be cautious," he whispered. "There could be men stationed outside, watching for anyone emerging." Harold nodded in agreement. His own instincts, honed by decades of hunting these woods, suggested similar caution. "Let me look first," he said, easing himself past Michael to approach the exit. With painstaking care, Harold peered through the concealing vegetation. Night had fully descended outside, the forest illuminated only by moonlight, filtering through the canopy. He couldn't discern any immediate threat. No flashlight beams, no human silhouettes against the trees. But years of experience had taught him that absence of visible danger didn't guarantee safety. They waited several minutes, listening intently. The forest sounds were normal. The distant hoot of an owl, the rustle of nocturnal creatures in the underbrush. No human voices, no unnatural movement. "I think it's clear," Harold finally whispered, "but we should move carefully and stay under cover as much as possible." Michael nodded, helping Harold push aside the branches partially concealing the exit. Together they emerged into the night air, the cool breeze a welcome relief after the stifling confines of the tunnel. Harold oriented himself quickly, recognizing the grove of ancient hemlocks to their east. "Miller's Creek is that way," he said, pointing. "Perhaps half a mile. The extraction point would be beyond it." They had taken only a few cautious steps when a sound froze them in place, the unmistakable metallic click of a weapon being readied to fire. "Don't move," a cold voice commanded from the darkness to their right. Harold felt his heart sink. After everything they had endured, to be captured now, so close to potential safety, seemed a cruel twist of fate. He glanced at Michael, seeing his nephew's expression shift from fear to grim resignation. "Hands where I can see them," the voice continued. Harold complied slowly, raising his hands despite the pain the movement caused in his injured hip. Michael did the same, his medical bag slipping from his shoulder to the forest floor. A figure emerged from behind a massive oak tree, weapon raised. In the dim moonlight, Harold could make out a man's silhouette, but not his features. "Agent Cho?" Michael's surprised voice broke the tense silence. The figure stepped closer, revealing himself indeed to be the FBI agent they had last seen creating a diversion in the cave. His suit was torn and dirty, his face scratched, but he was very much alive and in control of the situation. "Dr. Peterson," Cho acknowledged, lowering his weapon. "Mr. Whitaker, I'm glad to see you both made it out." "You escaped the cave," Harold said, relief evident in his voice. "We weren't sure." "Barely," Cho admitted. "They were more numerous and better equipped than we anticipated. I've been monitoring this exit for the past hour, hoping Martinez and the girl would emerge." His expression turned questioning. "They came through a different route?" "They should have reached the surface by now," Harold confirmed, assuming the passage remained stable and unguarded. Cho nodded. "My communications are down, but the last I heard, the extraction team was still in position at the secondary location. If Martinez and Sophia made it out, that's where they'd head." "Then so should we," Michael said, retrieving his medical bag. "Can you walk, Mr. Whitaker?" Cho asked, noting Harold's obvious discomfort. "I'll manage," Harold replied stoically. "Just lead the way." The journey to the extraction point was arduous. Harold's injury slowed their pace considerably, despite support from both Michael and Agent Cho. The forest, normally as familiar to Harold as his own farmhouse, seemed transformed by night and circumstance into a treacherous obstacle course of fallen logs, concealing hollows and tangled underbrush. They had covered perhaps half the distance when the sound of rotors broke the night silence. A helicopter approaching from the east. "Could be our extraction team," Cho said, "or it could be Whitridge's people. Either way, we need to move faster." They pressed on, Harold gritting his teeth against the pain that threatened to overwhelm him with each step. The helicopter sounds grew louder, then faded, only to return more intensely minutes later. "They're searching a pattern," Cho observed grimly, "looking for us or for Martinez and Sophia." They finally reached a clearing that Harold recognized as being near the coordinates Martinez had shown them. The helicopter noise had faded again, but flashlight beams were visible through the trees ahead. "Stay here," Cho instructed, drawing his weapon again. "I'll make contact and verify it's our team." Harold and Michael watched as the agent moved cautiously toward the lights, disappearing into the underbrush. Minutes passed in tense silence, Harold fighting the urge to follow despite his injury. Just when he was about to suggest they investigate, Cho reappeared at the edge of the clearing. "It's clear," he called. "Our team, and you're going to want to see this." With Michael's assistance, Harold limped to the extraction point, a larger clearing where an unmarked SUV waited, its headlights illuminating the surrounding trees. Several armed individuals in tactical gear secured the perimeter, while a familiar figure stood by the vehicle's open door. "Grandpa!" Sophia broke away from Justice Martinez's protective stance, running toward Harold with Rusty, loping beside her. Harold opened his arms, ignoring the pain as the child collided with him in a fierce embrace. "You made it through," he whispered, relief washing over him in a dizzying wave. "You're safe." "We both did," Sophia confirmed, her small face beaming up at him in the headlights' glow. "And Mom's okay too." The judge talked to her on the special phone. "Eleanor?" Harold's voice caught on the name. "She's recovered?" Justice Martinez approached, her normally austere expression softened by what might have been a smile. "Not fully, but she's conscious and stable. In fact," she gestured toward the SUV, "she insisted on speaking with you directly." Martinez handed Harold a satellite phone. With trembling fingers, he raised it to his ear. "Eleanor," he said, his voice hardly more than a whisper. "Dad." The voice on the other end was weak, but unmistakably his daughter's. "You took care of my girl." "Of course I did," Harold replied, emotion threatening to choke off his words. She's extraordinary, Eleanor, just like her mother." A soft sound, perhaps a laugh, perhaps a sob, came through the connection. "I'm sorry it took all this for us to speak again." "No," Harold said firmly. "I'm the one who should apologize. I was too proud, too stubborn." "We both were," Eleanor interrupted gently. "Whitakers, remember? But maybe it's not too late to change that." As the helicopter returned, descending into the clearing to transport them to safety, Harold looked at his granddaughter's hopeful face, then back at the farm he was leaving behind, the land that had simultaneously been his prison and his salvation for so many years. "No," he agreed, a lifetime of regret giving way to unexpected possibility. "It's not too late at all."